This is Story Talk, a series of online conversations featuring artists and storytellers from around the world, especially curated for the 5th anniversary of StoryFest Singapore. I'm joined today by Daniel Allison, writer, storyteller, and podcast producer, all the way from Scotland. And we're going to be talking about how to adapt text for storytelling performance. Hi, Daniel.
Hi, Kamini. Nice to see you.
So nice to see you again, Daniel, through this medium. And I'd like, to ask you about your practice, both as a storyteller and also as a creative writer. I know you've published books and you've been telling stories all around the world. So could you share with us a little bit about your practice, both as a writer and as a teller of tales?
Sure. Well, as an oral storyteller, I tell a lot of stories from animistic or indigenous cultures which believe that everything is alive and everything has a spirit and has agency and perhaps can talk. I find these cultures and these stories very interesting. And then I also tell a lot of stories from my own culture. So I love to tell stories from the British Isles, particularly from Scotland, from Wales, and from Ireland. Recently, I've been digging deeper into the more epic stories. And I'm interested in using these stories as a way to try and get to know our ancestors better, try and get to know the spirituality, the religion, and understand the wisdom of the native peoples of these islands. As a writer, my writing has become very, very intertwined with my storytelling. So I've written a couple of collections of traditional Celtic or Scottish stories. I've got one, Scottish Myths and Legends, which is a collection of Scottish myths and legends. And I've got another, Finn and the Fianna, which is a collection of stories about Finn McCool, leader of a warrior band, the Fianna. So I've got those. And then I also write fantasy set in ancient Scotland and Scandinavia. I've got a series I'm working on called the Orkney Cycle, and that's very much based on the traditional stories, but bringing in elements of modern fantasy to create something new.
So, Daniel, I know you work a lot with ancient mythology and long epics and legends, and you take stories from oral tradition, you adapt them, and you put them down into written text, into publications, into books. And some of these books you've written yourself, and you also actually perform and tell these stories. So I'd like to ask you, what is that process like? And can you share this entire experience of taking something old, putting it into a book or a novel or a piece of text, and then presenting it as a performer and storyteller?
Well, I've been working on a novel called The Shattering Sea, first part of an epic I'm calling the Orkney Cycle, which is based on an Orcadian story called Asipattle and the Muckle Maester Stoorworm, or Asipattle and the really, really big worm or serpent, which is about a giant sea serpent that attacks the north of Scotland, and all the brave warriors are too scared to try and face it. But this little lackadaisical boy who just lies dreaming by the fire gets up and says, "I'm going to save the kingdom and marry the princess." He, of course, gets up and does that. So I wanted to write a novel based on a story I told. So I kind of went through lots of ones that I tell, and this one just kind of leapt out at me. The main thing that's guided me through this whole process is just following my instinct. As a writer and as a storyteller, you learn to really, really strongly rely on your instinct, just doing what feels right. This one felt like the right story to tell. The story just kind of told itself to me. And then it was a case of just planning out a rough framework and then starting to write and seeing what happened, seeing what images presented themselves, seeing what moments in the story said, "Oh, you think you're going this way, but you need to go that way," and just following that. Another important element was to change it up so that instead of having this little boy rescue the princess, who was just a prize in the story, she became this kick-ass warrior princess who was much more efficient than him in saving the kingdom.
So what are some of the challenges, right, or difficulties or stumbling blocks that you faced when you're working with these very traditional and rather well-known stories in your culture and where you come from? And then when you think about how to write them and how to present them in text, what are some of these things that you have encountered in the past?
I think I imagined there was going to be a lot more problems than there have been so far. Certainly with the Asabattle story, for example, I was terrified to hand over the text to Tom Muir, an Orcadian storyteller who had helped me a lot with the research in the background. And I thought he'd say, oh, this is inaccurate and you shouldn't have said this and you shouldn't have written that. And he was like, no, this is wonderful. And I said, oh, but I think I've got this wrong historically. He says, who cares? It's a story. So there were no problems there. Recently, I've put out my book of Fianna stories, and there seems to be a bit more protectiveness about them. The Irish really identify with those stories. They're very important to them. So I've noticed people being a bit wary, like, oh, you're retelling those stories, huh? But I think it's really important to just follow your heart. I tell stories, or I write or retell stories because I love them. And so because I love them, I want to tell them in the best way I can, in a way that feels sincere to the story. So that's what I do. So I don't think I'm doing anything wrong. And I'd always just say to people, if you don't like what I've done, I'd love to hear your version of the story. This is just mine.
So from a lot of what we've been talking about and the responses that I'm hearing from you, what's important and what's coming out strongly is you do a lot of research, and you ask other people about their opinion, and you seek out information from other storytellers or other people who know about the story. So if somebody wants to start researching stories from the oral tradition and start thinking about putting them down into a collection, a printed collection of text, do you have any tips, anything to guide them as they enter this first foray into doing something like this?
Yeah, I would say you need to absolutely work with your heart, but you need to absolutely work with your head as well. So, fall in love with the story, follow your instincts, try telling it or writing it or workshopping it or doing whatever you can just to let it stretch its wings in different ways and explore new places and let different inflections come into it. But at the same time, do your research, find every version possible, listen to every storyteller you can who's telling the story, do every course you can find so that you're covering every angle.
You're also a very successful podcast producer, with lots of mythology, legends, and stories from the oral tradition, and you feature lots of storytellers as your guests. So that's a different medium of, publishing and presenting these materials, these ancient stories. And what's that like? Because we think about presenting and performing storytelling always on the stage or in a live in-person session with audiences. But what you're doing, which is very oral and auditory, is also a way of presenting stories and performing stories, but through this podcast or audio medium.
The audience are there when you're telling a story over a podcast. They are listening. They might not be listening in that exact time. They might not be listening in that exact place, but they are listening. And I really find that I just need to use my imagination to connect to them over that divide in time and that divide in place. And so I feel that I can connect to my audience. It just requires that bit of imagination. I also think that stories like to be told in different ways. They like to breathe. They like to live. They like to expand into new places and expand in new ways. So whether it's telling a story on a podcast, whether it's telling a story in a video, whether it's telling a story in a novel form that was previously an oral tale, I think it's a natural thing to do. It's our natural creative impulse to do that. I think the stories like it, and if what you do doesn't quite work, then fine, it will get forgotten, and the other forms of the story will live on. So yeah, I just try things out, and so far I've just enjoyed working in all of these mediums, and it's really allowed me to bring the stories to new people and to connect to new people and make new friends in Australia and America and Canada and all over the world who I've never met, but I'm connected to by stories.
Are you working on a project currently? Is there something that, that's like a work in progress or something that you're developing that you'd like to share with audiences and viewers around the world?
And yes, I'm working on adaptations of a couple of stories from Celtic myth, or a few. One is Dermot and Grania, which is the central story from the Finn McCool cycle. Another is the fourth branch of the Mabinogion Welsh story. Another one is the first branch of the Mabinogion, another Welsh story. And I've been trying to experiment with these stories in different ways, because they're long stories, which you can't easily tell just, you can't tell in 10 minutes, half an hour, or even an hour very well. But I think, well, stories don't necessarily have to be told in those time slots, even though that's what we normally encounter. So with Dermot and Grania, I've been telling it to my partner, making a fire in the garden at night and just spending a whole evening going for a walk down a country lane another night, or camping another night and telling a bit more of the story. And then with the fourth branch, I told that over a few nights to friends when we're out camping in an ancient woodland just by the fire, freezing cold at night. And this is feeling like the best way to explore stories for me right now, partly because I feel like I want to explore them in ways in which my audience are in a different mind state. They're in this open to their receptive, their dreaming mind, their imaginations, in which I am as well. So I'm not in performance mode, and I feel very relaxed and I can really explore the story. So that's what I'm playing with right now. And I'm really interested in, once things are more opened up, because we're in the pandemic right now, finding places where we can go for 2 days or 3 days and hear a story in this slow time, deep time format, where people aren't thinking about their next show or the dinner they've got booked afterwards, or checking their phones, where people can really get consumed by a story. So that's what I'm keen on just now. I'm working on the Roundhouse Storytelling School, which is my new online self-directed storytelling school, building up that just now. We've got students from all over the world joining, which is really nice. And then I'm also working on a couple of new books. One is The Jaguar King, a collection of shape-shifting stories from around the world. And the other is The Spay Queen, which is the second novel in the Orkney cycle.
Daniel, what's one thing that you would like to share with our viewers about your experience in adapting text for telling stories?
I would say not to be fearful. I'm noticing an increasing climate of wariness among storytellers and creative people in general about saying the wrong thing, or saying things that might be seen as disrespectful or appropriative or problematic. And it seems to, I've noticed it's got to the extent where people are saying that it's perhaps wrong to write a novel set in another culture, because that's culturally appropriative. And I think this is a really worrying trend. And I think it's really important as creatives that we aren't fearful, that we're very respectful and we're careful and we're well informed, but we're not fearful in expressing ourselves and telling the stories we love, and adapting things and moving things into new shapes and new forms. So if you've got an idea for a project or a story you want to reshape or explore, so long as you're working with your head and working with your heart, and so long as you're willing to have a conversation around what you're doing and let in and explore different views, and don't be fearful in letting stories take new shapes, because that's their nature. They're not meant to be frozen. Just because one person wrote down one particular version on one particular day doesn't mean that's the ultimate version of the story. Stories are meant to live and breathe.
Thank you so much, Daniel. I've been speaking to Daniel Allison, storyteller, writer, and podcast producer based in Scotland. If you'd like to find out more about different applications of storytelling and how other people practice storytelling around the world, stay tuned and follow us on our social media. And there's plenty more Story Talk videos on our YouTube channel for StoryFest Singapore. Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Kamini.